Wrapping up our event for this evening, we'll have a panel featuring a number of Chinese healthcare investors kind of sharing their insights. Our moderator tonight is Dr. Ruby Wang, who has worked across a number of organizations, companies, et cetera, in the Chinese healthcare space. I'm so delighted to have her leading this discussion and think we'll have a lot of really keen insights to glean onto. Ruby?
Thanks so much, Matthew. Hi, everyone. My name is Ruby. I'm the director of Linterest Health Consulting. I work across UK and China health markets, including on health policy and health tech. And I'm also on the Digital Health Council for the UK Royal Society of Medicine. It's really great to be here today. Thank you to the Department of Business and Trade, who I've worked with a lot at the British Embassy in Beijing, where I was previously head of health for the Foreign Office. So thank you for having me, and thanks to Serica and Ben and Matthew and the team for all of your coordinating as well. It's been a brilliant 3 days, and I'm excited to close off day 3 with our last session, a panel on investments in the Chinese healthcare market. Delighted to be joined by a stellar lineup. So I'll go around the virtual table first. We have Oscar Ramos, who is the general partner at SOSV and managing director at Orbit Startups. We have Henry Huang, who is the CEO of Hakim Unique Group, director of Serica as well. And we have Archie Preston, who is the overseas strategy and investment director at Yuwell. So maybe I'll just go around and let you introduce yourselves a little bit more. Firstly, Oscar, please. Thank you.
Yeah, Ruby, thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to this panel to come today and share. Well, I'm as you can see, not Chinese. I'm Spanish, but I've been in China for the last 15 years. Originally coming with a biomedical engineering background, dropping out of my PhD to build my first company in China. And for the last 15 years, I've been building companies, growing companies, getting financing for companies. Unfortunately, making quite a few mistakes, but enough to stay here, and enough success to eventually raise a venture capital fund and eventually join as a general partner in one of the most active venture capital funds in the world in terms of investment, and particularly in the healthcare space, the #1 most active early stage fund in investing in healthcare. Particularly in my case, as part of Orbit, I'm focusing most of my investment in emerging markets, covering multiple areas, but a lot of them having a connection with the regulated markets such as financial services, where I think there's quite a bit of overlap. Deep tech as a very strong element where we're working, and then I'm looking forward to the conversation today, and I'm sharing some ideas that hopefully will be useful for everybody that is evaluating international expansion for their company in this beautiful part of the world.
Thank you so much, Oscar. And Henry, please, next.
My name is Henry, and I am from Hakim Unique Group. My background is I grew up in the U.S., educated in the U.S., and after college I worked in the U.S. government at the Treasury and at various other agencies. About over a decade ago, I started my first startup in healthcare in the U.S. With various platforms, and I ran multiple startups. Have a lot of similar experiences, both good and bad, like Oscar just mentioned, and had a lot of great, valuable experiences. And so, about 5 years ago, I ultimately joined Hakim Unique Group to build their healthcare division, and ultimately in 2020 I became the CEO of the group, which have more broad responsibilities. And Hakim Unique Group is a group that was started out of a college dorm about 2 decades ago, focused on developing smart cities in China. And this was early 2000s, so China was actually rapidly growing. And so, from winning its first contract out of the college dorm all the way to a multi-billion-dollar public company. And from there, Hakim Unique Group became a holding company, an investment conglomerate that's 100% privately held by the founder, Jack Wang, and became a large investment conglomerate that is focused on primarily three sectors today. After my involvement, my joining of Hakim in about 5 years ago, kind of narrowed down the focus into three categories: healthcare, energy, and impact-based technologies around the world. So, hopefully, we could offer, some good insights today to some of our attendees interested in this side of, coming into the Chinese market or others.
Great, thank you so much, Henry. And then Archie, please.
Yeah, great, and thanks a lot to Ben and Matty for organizing this. It's last few days has been very interesting, very insightful, and good to see so many familiar faces throughout the last few days. Yeah, I'm Archie. I'm currently the Overseas Strategy and Investment Director at Yuwell. Just a little bit of myself. I started learning Chinese at university, originally in Cambridge, then went over to Peking University, and then spent about 4 years in Hong Kong, basically helping Chinese companies IPO in the Hong Kong market, sponsoring those IPOs. For the next 4 years, I was then working in China, Europe, cross-border M&A, first year in London and the next few years in Shanghai, and sort of working across healthcare, consumer and tech, but with a bit of a focus on healthcare. And quite recently have just joined Yuwell. A little bit on Yuwell. It's one of China's largest medical device companies. It's a part of it is listed, and it's got about $4-5 billion US dollar market cap. We're sort of we were the first privately owned medical device company to list in China in 2008. And we're covering about 7 or 8 different business lines. A few of our major ones are respiratory. So that includes sort of ventilators, oxygen concentrators, nebulizers, things like that. We also look at POCT devices, IVD devices, and we also look at things like sterilization, disinfectant, ophthalmology. So quite a range. We would sort of aim to position ourselves as China's #1 home healthcare medical device company. That's our major focus for most of these segments. Yeah, I hope that I can impart some insights, and looking forward to learn more from the other panelists today.
Thanks so much, Archie. So I guess to kick us off, I mean, over the past 3 days, we've heard a lot about how difficult it can be to get into the Chinese market, but at the same time, how much opportunity there really is. So it'd be really interesting to hear from all of you, from your particular areas of expertise and all of your years working with and in China, what particular advantages or disadvantages might UK health companies have in the Chinese market above other countries or compared to domestic players? And how can those UK companies capitalize and maximize their advantages? So maybe start back with Oscar then.
Sure, happy to share. Well, I'll say that that in general it is a tough space for foreign companies, regardless of where they come. Not sure there's any specific area where there's any advantage, but it is also potentially an area where you can have opportunities. And I think that right now the changes that we're seeing recently are making some of these opportunities easier, with more opportunities from hospitals to sell to hospitals, a bit more open flexibility in terms of policies. And as long as there's a real advantage in terms of technology barrier, as long as you're talking about companies with a competitive edge in terms of IP and serious research behind, this is a big market where there's a lot of opportunities. There's areas where sometimes we receive interest from startups that they have a bit more general healthcare type of solutions without these competitive advantage in terms of technology, and they look at this as of the market and say, hey, if I manage to capture part of that market, it's going to be a great opportunity. Well, unfortunately, Chinese companies here, they're going to be way better than most of the foreign companies when your competitive advantage relies on user experience and understanding of how the healthcare system works here. In fact, the opposite might be the case, where some of these Chinese companies are actually going to have a very strong competitive advantage expanding internationally, because the whole the market here is very, very competitive, and companies will use very advanced user experience and design, iterative design process to make sure that they improve the whole customer experience. And especially in the digital health space, you will see a huge adoption from the consumer, which creates a virtual loop that makes things very difficult. So first thing is, like always, you need to have something that is really competitive in this market. There needs to be some protection. I think historically there were a lot of concerns about IP protection. I think that's kind of like memories of the past. There's increasingly more and more protection here, so there's opportunities. Then the question is how and what part of areas. We're particularly seeing a lot of opportunities not in type of mass market. So everybody comes to China looking at, hey, you know, there are like 1.4 billion people. This is a massive opportunity, and it is true. But this is also a market where you have opportunity on smaller niche markets, where probably this is the largest market in the world. It's the largest market in the world where there will be less competition domestically, because a lot of the local players will go for the big market with a very strong advantage, which is there's a very good digitalization of the healthcare system, which allows to be able to integrate more and more solutions. So in my opinion, those are the areas where there's a big opportunity. Thinking about a bit more niche type of applications, and particularly in areas where there's a strong technology advantage for anybody that wants to compete with you. And that could deal with some of the solutions that are, I'm not talking just about rare disease, I'm talking about sometimes solutions dealing with infant type of conditions, or with applications for the elderly, where, I mean, it might be a small part of the population, is growing, but still is massive market.
Great, thank you, Oscar. Definitely, I think the Wild West model, or the copy-paste model of Chinese domestic health innovation in the past has undergone some change, especially throughout the pandemic. And as you said, kind of international and UK companies trying to come in need to bring in their particular kind of USP. Henry, what are your thoughts?
Could you repeat the question, Ruby? I just want to make sure that I'm answering this in the most helpful way.
No problem. So in terms of UK healthcare companies, I'm directing this because that's our audience mostly today and for this conference. What particular advantages or disadvantages might they have in the Chinese market?
Yeah, well, I think that the advantages are very subjective. Again, it's you know, I could list so many examples, including companies which I personally ran in or invested in, and on behalf of a group as well. And I'll give you an example. One of my first early startups was developing a post-processing software, what we call AI today, for cardiac applications. What that software would be able to do would be able to diagnose with a high degree of level of accuracy, replicate that of a cardiologist. It passed China. I developed it in the US, and I thought it was one of the best softwares ever. And so did all the other cardiologists and experts at the major universities. I brought it to China and went through the clinical trials at the top tier 3A hospitals, as they call it, with some of the top experts. And, you know, they all loved it. You know, it passed with flying colors. They loved it. After the trials, it went to market. And it didn't do as well as we thought it would. And the reason is because, you know, I had one summary from that experience. The patients were the payers. They didn't understand it. Like, why did I need an AI, pay $500 for an AI to evaluate me? Why did I come to a cardiologist? The doctors were, they loved this. It assisted them, it helped them a lot, saved them a lot of time, but they weren't the payers. So I summed up, the advantages are very subjective, but the disadvantages are very similar. Those you could probably relate more. And in the market in China, I think one of the major focuses that from the UK any healthcare organizations looking for opportunities with China, whether it's China going out or coming into China, tapping into the Chinese market. Like Oscar mentioned, yeah, everyone hears 1.4 billion people. They're like, wow. Most of the time, that 1.4 billion people has nothing to do with anyone. For instance, as an example, like Dyson, the blow dryer. Okay, as an example, I'm just making this up. The Dyson blow dryer. It's like $500 blow dryer. They're like, wow, China has 1.5 billion people or 1.4 billion people. Well, believe it or not, your target audience is about 40 million. Yeah, that's probably less than Japan, because the population that could properly afford, your product or service must be within, the category, income category. So you can't discount that. And so that's a lot. That's some of the things to be, aware of for organizations looking for opportunities here in this side of the world, and also kind of in China, it's kind of aligning with what the kind of the policies, and they will give you hints on what their key focus would be on. And if you look at the past 4 decades of China's fast growth, it went from producing very low cost goods like clothing all the way to now iPhones. And, as the population is aging and, the one-child policy, now they have a population crisis, which means the workforce that once accelerated the economy, they're gone. And now they're begging for people to have kids. And so because of that workforce, they can't rely on low quality labor anymore. So one of the priorities is actually, the country is actually saying, well, we want to produce high quality things and be able to export high quality things. Before, they would have to export 100 containers of clothes. Now it's just 1 container of drugs. As an example, they'll probably replace thousands of containers. Now that's quality as an example. So the priorities have to align as well. And I do believe that, for companies and, innovative companies in the UK, China is definitely a good market, but you got to be very focused. You got to make sure that you know that what your value is and how sustainable it is in the long term. And you'll find your niche. If you find the right partners, both capital and go-to-market partners with good experience, local experience, it can be done properly. So that's my 2 cents. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Henry. I think you bring up such a great point. For any organization trying to enter the China market, it's not just about understanding the regulatory or the legal pathways, but really a key understanding of the health policy landscape that is there, because that is the backbone towards which you're going to be accessing your customers and your patients. And this goes for, startups to MNCs, whether that's big pharma, big tech, or otherwise. Certainly from my own experience working with them. And I think, for example, we talk about rare diseases being such a big market in China because of the big population. No diseases are rare, right? But because of the policy and the lack of access from the doctor to the patient, that clinical pathway to get to the client. So the market is maybe not as big as stats initially make out to be. So I think that's a really excellent point. Thanks, Henry. And then moving on to Archie, I'm keen to hear your thoughts as a Brit working in China. I'm sure you have very specific cross-border expertise there.
Yeah, I would echo certainly what a few of the guys have said over the last few days, which is I'm finding it more and more rare to see overseas companies look to come into China and do things on their own and try and set up their own team and sort of take it on themselves. I think previously there were more companies that felt that they could do that, and similar to what you're saying, heard about the size, felt very comfortable with their management team internally, and felt that they, we've expanded to new regions before, we can do China as well. And even Yuwell, I mean, we were speaking to some relatively large US players about a few years ago, and we're just now again reconnecting with them, because the first time we spoke to them, they said, we're going to do this ourselves. We don't need to partner with you guys. And now 3 years down the line, they still haven't got their registration for their first generation equipment. And so that's certainly an issue that a lot of overseas companies are facing. I think in terms of the advantages that a UK innovative company has, when we look to partner with overseas companies, we usually do so kind of with 2 major goals in mind. Number 1 is to try and expand our overseas business sales. So we would maybe be looking for European or US companies with a good brand, good understanding of the market, great distribution channels, good infrastructure overseas. The other bucket would then be really interesting technology that we felt that we could bring into China. And whereas before, the kind of made in Europe or made in UK or made in Germany, that brand was quite attractive for a lot of the Chinese market, especially when you're pushing to hospitals. That, of course, is also becoming less and less with all the localization policies that have been mentioned as well. So I think for UK companies, it's really about what the UK reputation has is obviously an extremely established reputation for good academic research and technological innovation, where it might be in Oxford, maybe Cambridge, or any of these regions where have a really good global reputation for these areas. And I think it's about having a technology that people, when they see UK innovative companies, they will be bringing that kind of mindset into it. So I think that is a benefit. But is it the kind of benefit which means that they can sort of walk into China and do their own thing? I don't think so. And I think that's where the local partners come in pretty useful.
Thanks so much, Archie. Again, really great insights. Exactly as you said, I've definitely found that even though the UK is small, the legacy of kind of long-standing research, technical talent, and also understanding of the National Health Service, which is still world leading for, effective, cost-efficient, quality, accessible care, goes without saying, and is still very much respected in the Chinese healthcare markets too. So that should really be highlighted. Moving on to the next question, I think all 3 of you have, lived experience and expertise working in China. Do you have any examples of cross-border cases that you think our audience might find relevant or interesting to hear? That would be really great. So again, back to Oscar, please.
Sure. I mean, we've made a lot of investments in companies in the cross-border space for a long time. Our thesis of investment in mainland China was really about arbitrage, and that arbitrage was around what China is really good at that we can export in terms of technology startups, and then what China had in high demand, but and we could find in excess outside of China, and then bring it to China. And some of the healthcare companies particularly in this area that I mentioned, with very, very advanced IP, sometimes targeting specific niche cases, was one of the cases that we looked at. And one of the companies I wanted to share is actually a UK company called BrainGaze. It's a company in the digital theranostic space, where they in a mobile app they combine diagnostics and therapy for ADHD and then neurodegenerative diseases, where they're able to leverage the camera and a phone. And in that case, the partnership with China was very important because the access to 3D cameras in phones was more easier here, more accessible here. Some of the world leading companies that could be the best partners for them globally, they were Chinese companies, and they will leverage that camera in the phone, and then through a very simple 5-minute test, they were able to diagnose, especially in the case of a MCI and early stages of Alzheimer's, they were able to diagnose with a 95% accuracy based on clinical trials compared to gold standard test. So that was really good. But what was even more interesting was the therapy element, that although it's still in early stages of the clinical trials, they're at least not as advanced as the therapy. They were able to prove that they had very positive impact in the delay application of in the advance of any type of condition, and that's something that they work in China. The use case was initially working with Ping An and facilitating with them a localization of the product, what it's sometimes called a product market fit in the startup world. We work very closely with them together with a local partner in this case that was facilitating the initial access to real customers, the feedback from the market, not just at a user case with all the patients to make sure the patients were comfortable, that everything worked the way it was meant to work, but also trying to figure out a bit the regulatory framework and everything else, but for something that actually worked, validating the demand to eventually move to the next stage, which was the distribution, where in that case they decided to partner actually with a local company that was the best approach. No, it was actually complicated to achieve what they wanted, but that was like a two phases case to eventually sign a distribution agreement that was very positive for the company, and that also held the company globally by supporting the recognition of the potential of the technology. So that became very, very strategic. There was actually surprisingly a lot of open mind and reception in testing and evaluating that product here.
I mean, that's fascinating. Thank you, Oscar. Just as a quick follow-up, I guess. So with this example, it's, you know, a case study of a successful product with great technology. That's an important factor. But then you've also mentioned a partnership with Ping An, which is obviously the health company with the biggest health tech footprint within China. So which of those pieces was more important, or is it kind of this synergy that brought that success pathway, do you think?
I mean, I think everything is one step at a time. So obviously you need to have all the right ingredients. You need to be in the right place at the right time and with the right partners. So startups in general are very risky, are difficult. If you look at the numbers, the chances of success of a startup is very low. So you need to make sure that in that process, you evaluate all the moving pieces and you try to work on the risking the different elements. And in this case, one of the things that you want to do is, well, let's look at what's the riskiest assumption, what's the riskiest element. So don't try to negotiate distribution before you have any actual proof to the fact that what you're doing is something that matters, is something that there's demand. Also, the way you frame the product is very, very important. The way you create the user experience is very important. We have countless cases of companies that with the same technology, they had to change the value proposition. I mean, I always use very, very mundane and very simple examples with companies when I try to explain them how the same product can change. And you know, I talked about organic fruit. When you go to any shop, almost at least in Europe, when I go to any organic fruit shop, you'll see zero plastic everywhere. Organic fruit has benefits in terms of health quality, in terms of flavor, but there's also an element of environment. If you go to an organic fruit shop in China, you'll see plastic everywhere. Like sometimes there's a wrapping on an apple that then has like 2 apples together and then 4 apples together. There's plastic everywhere because the main concern and the main value proposition that people expect here from organic fruit is food safety, because that's a major concern. You don't have to change the fact that you have organic fruit, but what the customer cares most is not the flavor, is not the fact that it's positive for the environment. They care about the food safety. That doesn't mean that they don't care about the other things, but most people need one reason, very important reason, to decide to make a purchase. So that's something that you need to, as part of the localization, you need to understand your customer and you need to understand what do they care. We have, I mean, I don't want to like take a lot of time on this, but there are so many examples of companies that one of the key elements of success is that they have to change. We have 0 companies that didn't change that have been successful in China. All of them, all the companies that had success in China, they did change the value proposition. They might not have changed their fundamental technology, but they did change and adapt the value proposition, the target customer, the pricing, many elements that are part of the packaging that sometimes, especially as scientists, and I come from a technology scientific background, and I had like to work with a lot of scientists explaining, hey, this is very important. Without that technology, you will not have a seat on the table. But once you have a seat on the table, you need to understand that making sure that your peel looks nice and has like a good flavor will ensure that people actually will take the pill. Because a very ugly, disgusting pill might work, but less people are going to be interested in taking it. So make sure that that user experience is considered in your process of localization.
Thanks so much, Oscar. I think that's a great lesson for everybody, staying agile and adaptable, because recognizing that you are working with completely different environments. And, you know, what a great metaphor with fruit in the supermarket. I think when I've been in China's supermarkets, I've seen like peeled orange segments, then wrapped in plastic, which is hilarious. But, you know, moving on to Henry, please. Any examples? Would be great to hear from you as well. Sorry, you're on mute.
I think a good example that off the top of my head that I think worth sharing, at least in the drug space, Hakim, we've invested very actively across the world, in the US, in Europe, in life sciences, all the way to acquiring health plans in the US and in the managed care space. So from healthcare services, diagnostics, one example that sticks out in my mind was a startup that had an AbbVie license, that a drug called Avex that I invested when I first started at Hakim about 5 years ago. And, we were able to help the startup come into China, start the application process, go through from phase 2 all the way to this year. We got approved by the NMPA and actually relocated the headquarters to China and took advantage of the capital markets and preparing for, an IPO in the main exchange in China after 5 years. And so that was quite a successful example, but not without its trials and tribulations along the way. It's quite a complex environment to navigate. And the second example was another healthcare services organization that became the core of Hakim Health in China, the operating arm. And what that is through M&A, through acquisitions of medical groups, in the US and other Western countries, we were able to align the medical providers to provide second opinion health services to Chinese patients and hospitals. And so this organization, we grew it within about 5 years, we grew it to over 300 tier 3A hospitals across China, where all the patient action is, all the serious conditions are there. And today this organization manages about 12 million lives for the major insurers like China Life and China Taiping Insurance. And what it provides them is their clients access at risk to healthcare services and benefits that maybe Westerners will not understand. But in China, access is such a pain, visiting a top provider at a hospital for a serious condition could be months on out, and getting an imaging study might be 2 weeks to 2 months out sometimes. And where we come in is we provide very valuable access, and so that they're not taking any wrong turns along the way. And with this network, we were able to derive significant value and make it into a sustainable platform that ultimately does benefit everyone. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Henry. And really interesting to hear about a different model of working in China, the M&A model. And as you said, healthcare access in China is a pain. I think all four of us have experienced that firsthand. So knowing where the problems are and then actually working to solve them, I think is a really, really great example. Archie, how about you?
Yeah, I'll talk about one, probably focus a little bit more on the difficulties, because I think that's an interesting place to start. So Yuwell made an acquisition about 5 years ago of a German company. It does AEDs, so defibrillators, the kind of defibrillators that you see in airports and train stations and those kind of public places. So it was a sort of relatively small to medium-sized German company, maybe a few tens of millions sort of deal size, USD. And the idea at the time was really that back then there were very few of those products in China, but our founder believed very strongly that that was a clear trend that they were going to start being installed throughout Chinese public places. And so it was a pretty simple sort of philosophy for this acquisition, which was simply we buy them, we keep their team in Germany, we then bring their products into China and we sell it in China. So it was pretty straightforward. And so what happened was that once we started to bring their products into China, we realized that there firstly needed to be some differences in terms of the engineering of them for the regulatory authorities. Then secondly, as we started doing some surveys within China ourselves, we also found that there were slight differences in preferences for these AEDs between Western and Chinese providers. Chinese here preferred bigger screens than they did in the West. I mean, yeah, it doesn't come back to some cultural thing. It's just these small preferences just exist in different places from places. And so we started then creating a slightly new or a slightly altered product for the Chinese market, which then meant that we were having some difficulties with the R&D team in Germany and then the R&D team in China. And there was a few crossed hairs, and the R&D team in Germany had been doing this for decades. So they were the sort of the experts here, but they obviously didn't understand the Chinese market enough. So then what eventually happened was, for our first sort of generation, we started basically putting out two slightly different products, one in overseas market and one in China. And the R&D time was like more than double as much, because there were all these kind of complications and differences with sort of the discussions between our two teams. We also wanted to then move some of the production of the overseas devices to China. That also then had some difficulties where you're sort of manufacturing two very similar but slightly separate products. And so it became, for a few years, it was really a headache. And what was initially a pretty simple proposition, which was take these products from Germany that had been manufactured for 10, 15 years, sell them in China. It then sort of generated and gave way to loads of problems. And so what we have now is we've actually got a fully merged R&D team, where the head of the German R&D team is working very closely with the head of the Chinese team. They're both spending, 2-3 months at a time, either going over, the whole team will go over to Germany or the whole team comes over to China. And we found that even for what is a relatively sort of simple product, it's not extremely high barriers to entry or not extremely high technological requirements. It's really necessary to have really integrated working, whether it's on the R&D front, whether it's on the manufacturing front. The sales are slightly separate. The sales can be fairly separate. So yeah, I think that's an interesting one to bring up, because I guess what I'm trying to say is what seems like a very obvious and very easy thing to do, as soon as you're working cross-border, as soon as you're working in two environments with different regulatory systems and authorities, it can become complicated quite quickly. And so even when you think, oh, just we'll sort it out here, they can sort it out there, we'll work separately, it actually often doesn't actually help and actually hinders things. So yeah, the importance, of course, of communication, of getting over there, either coming to China and spending really significant amounts of time here, or having the Chinese partner go over to Europe is really, really important.
Thank you so much. That was really, really helpful to hear. Definitely nothing is simple in China, and caveating for unexpected timelines or unexpected barriers along the way. I mean, this is why experts like the three of you are there to help companies kind of integrate and access the difficult but exciting market that there is. I've been told that we've basically run out of time, but I just want to squeeze in one last question now that we have all of you here, which is such a rare and great opportunity. Any kind of fire rounds on advice you'd give for, quick do or don'ts for people who are seeking to win business, investment or partnerships with you, companies like you in China and so on, just quickly to wrap up. So I'll go around all of you, Oscar, Henry, and then Archie again. Thanks.
Sure, yeah, just like 30 seconds. just do your homework. I mean, it's surprising the amount of people that they show up to absolutely unprepared and without the most basic research done before. I understand that you can learn from sometimes from your suppliers, from your potential investors, from your potential partners, but you're doing that at a cost that is high, which is your reputation. So there's a lot of ways that you can learn from others. Please do your homework. Don't show up so unaware. I mean, every time that you're meeting as an investor, which is mostly my main interaction with, or the most logic interaction, when I'm talking with someone that knows way less than me about a market, not being an expert on healthcare in China, is discouraging and doesn't make you look very good. So please do your homework.
Yeah, brutal, but so important. Thanks, Oscar.
I mean, I'm known to be very honest. I'm very honest to help, very honest to tell the truth. You know, you don't need people to tell you, like, you have like grandmothers and family to tell you how nice is everything. So you need reality to be able to react.
Such a great point. Thank you, Henry.
Yeah, I think Oscar covered it very well. Come prepared. You know, show up with you know what you're doing, know what you're offering, and make sure what you're doing is not only meaningful but be ready. And one simple way to be ready is just really to prepare with the right people, which oftentimes could lead to good access to the right partners. And you know, I think that is probably the most valuable, is finding the right partners to help you prepare, and then help find the right suitable partners that you should be working with, because it's never what you think. And you know, it's not you know, even large Fortune 500 organizations or large market cap public companies go into China, you know, following the same path and getting help and finding expert advisory help and guidance to find the right partners. So it's definitely not a money issue. It's a question of suitability. Find someone local and be prepared. Yeah.
Thank you. And finally, Archie.
Yeah, I would say be patient, probably. Everyone's kind of heard of the stories of overseas company coming into China and earning hundreds of millions in the first year, but that's not the default, and these things do take time. The other thing is do try and speak to your Chinese partner as much as possible, and especially try and understand is their product, is what you're offering kind of a side product or an interesting little idea for them, or is it within the main core thrust of what they're looking to do over the next 3-5 years? Because Chinese companies will also sort of dabble their feet in other technologies and just see how things are going and get little updates on what's happening. And you can sort of get strung along by some parties, but if you know that what you're doing is actually exactly the strategic direction of that Chinese party over the next 3 years, and that you can often get from annual reports, considering that most of these Chinese companies are listed, almost all. Yeah, I would say, yeah, I mean, I guess it goes back to Oscar's point, do your homework, but be a bit patient and make sure that what you're doing is really within the strategic direction of your partner.
Thank you so much, everyone. So just to recap, really great points. Do your homework, find the right partners and friends, be patient and communicate. So I think that rounds off a really great panel. I think the sign of a great panel is when you can keep going. So I feel like we could talk for 2-3 more hours, but thank you so much for your time and your expertise. I've had a great time, and I'll hand back to Matthew, please.
Really lovely stuff. Thanks, Ruby, and of course, Oscar, Henry, and Archie. I think great to hear the breadth of opportunity across the market. You know, room for smaller companies to enter, not just restricted to the big players, as long as you can, you know, identify a productive niche and of course do your homework.